Dave Talks Comics, Episode 33. Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comics I have read and cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com, on Twitter at Dave Talks Comics. Email can be sent to dave@davetalkscomics.com. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This is not a spoiler-free podcast. Dave Talks Comics is not a member of the Spoiler-Free Podcast Network. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics, I will almost certainly spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about a limited series from Marvel from about 10 years ago called Mekanix, which starred Kitty Pryde. And I will be starting a series which I am calling OHotMU, in which I will be going through and commenting on the original edition of Who's Who, the definitive guide to the definitive directory of the DC Universe, and the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Mekanix. Mekanix, which is spelled Mekanix, is a Marvel limited series which ran from December of 2002 through May of 2003. It ran for 6 issues and starred Kitty Pryde, who I believe at the time was called Shadowcat, but I'm not certain about that. And it has been reprinted in Extreme X-Men Volume 4, although that volume is out of print and from the last time I checked was a little pricey. I found out about this series through one of the lists that was posted on Comics Should Be Good, which is a blog on comic book resources, which was listing the top Kitty Pryde stories, or the top 10 or something like that, and this was one of them. And it intrigued me. I think it's written by Chris Claremont. The artist, the penciler, is Juan Babillo, and I think that was the biggest pull for me, the fact that it was Juan Babillo's artwork, because he's the one he drew a number of issues of the She-Hulk series that was written by Dan Slott, probably about the same time as this, maybe a little bit after this. In addition to Kitty Pryde, the series also features Karma, who's a character who I talked about, who was introduced in Marvel Team-Up number 100 2.5 decades earlier or something like that. But I just read that issue shortly before I read Mekanix, although that's a coincidence. I didn't plan it that way. The cover art, if you look online and you see the covers, the cover art is not by Babillo, so I think that's worth noting. And because I don't like it as much as the interior work. And the bad guys in this, there's really 2 bad guys, or 2 groups of bad guys. First off, you see there's this mutant hate group that I'm not terribly familiar with. This is from a period when I really was not reading X-Men at all, the early 2000s. I mean, I hadn't really read X-Men since it's probably been 20 years since I'd read X-Men on a regular basis. And other than that, the other bad guys are the Sentinels. And these aren't the Sentinels like they were back in the early 80s. These are some new version of the Sentinels who are smaller, are very adaptive. I suppose there were some adaptive Sentinels back in the day. Other things that are interesting about this, or that worth pointing out, is that Kitty Pryde is attending the University of Chicago. When she was first introduced, she was, I think, supposed to be 13 years old, something like that. She's working as a bartender on the side. She's going to a psychiatrist, and I think that's because her father was killed recently. There's some mention of that. Now, the psychiatrist doesn't know that she's a mutant, and really nobody at the school knows that she's a mutant. Karma is a mutant, but she is not attending the University of Chicago. I don't think so. So a lot of this story revolves around, well, okay, before I say that, I should say that this is set in a time period when there was like war almost declared between mutants and non-mutants and regular humans. And so there's a lot of mutant hate out there. And like I mentioned, there's this mutant hate group, which is, has like chapters, kind of like a political group, a political party would have on campus. They have a chapter on campus. So a lot of this revolves around Kitty dealing with the fact that she's a mutant who doesn't admit to being a mutant. She hasn't even told her psychiatrist at the beginning of the story. There's another mutant who comes into the picture who I think is introduced in the story, whose name is Shola Nkosi, who is from Genosha. And Genosha is another one of those things that is like a blind spot in my knowledge of X-Men and the X-Men universe. I know a little bit about it, but very little, and probably most of what I know comes from watching Wolverine and the X-Men, that 26-episode cartoon series, which I watched 2-3 years ago, something like that, when they released it on Netflix, whenever that was. But Genosha is some island, I think, in the Pacific, maybe somewhere near Australia, I'm not sure, which is, well, I probably should look it up, but I think it's open to mutants, and it's kind of like a haven for mutants, something like that. So a lot of this story revolves around, it kind of deals with, sometimes tangentially, but it's dealing with Kitty's identity crisis of sorts, which is the fact that she is a mutant, but she can't say that she's a mutant. And of course, eventually it comes out that she is a mutant, and she reveals it because situation dictates that she needs to do things that reveal it. There's also a guy in here who she had a crush on, whose name is Tom Moore, who's originally part of this mutant hate group. And the whole question is, whose side is he on? At one point, he's definitely on the mutant hate side, but then he finds out that she is a mutant, and he's got a girlfriend who's actually the leader of this mutant hate group, and she and so then there's this whole question of whose side is he on? And I don't know if that's handled the best way. I mean, I think it's a good plot element, but they probably could have done a better job with it. And in general, I thought that there was a little too much plot and action in this. I mean, they were obviously striving for making the whole thing about her identity. Who is she really? Is she a human? Is she a mutant? What does it matter that she's a mutant? How important is that? This was all supposed to be part of the story and supposed to be important. It was important to the story, but I wasn't completely taken by the way they handled it, by the way Chris Claremont handled it. I wasn't crazy about the pacing. Quite often it felt rushed. It felt like the story didn't have time to breathe. It felt like it was push all the way. And there wasn't enough character moments, or enough character moments that were well paced enough to really buy into it. It was a little more telling than showing, I guess, is one way to look at it. And I guess the other thing is, when I thought of Juan Babillo's artwork, his work on She-Hulk with Dan Slott. She-Hulk was a book that had a lot of humor in it. And so I was probably thinking of that. And his artwork works very well. It's a little, I don't know, I don't want to say, it's not really cartoony in the traditional sense, if there is a traditional sense of cartoony, but he does draw some of these exaggerated characters, and he doesn't draw them entirely. You wouldn't mistake his work for being a clone of somebody like John Byrne or George Perez or one of those types of artists, somebody who draws thin lines. And I mean, there are these big, wide. He draws things with lots of curves and interesting lines, but it's not what I traditionally think of as cartoony. But it worked well with the humor in She-Hulk, and I didn't think it worked. Well, I don't know. I wasn't. I think most of the problem I have with this has to fall on Chris Claremont's shoulders, not on Juan Babillo's shoulders. I think he did a fine job drawing this and visually telling the story. I just didn't think that he probably wasn't the best match for this kind of story. So I was a little disappointed. I didn't feel like it was a waste of my time to read this because I hadn't read it, and I was intrigued by it, and I wanted to see, it gave me a second chance to see Juan Babillo's artwork on something else. But I can't say that I loved it, and I can't say that I would recommend it unless you really like Kitty Pryde, or you really like the X-Men, and you're a completist or something like that. Okay, I'm starting a new feature, segment that I'm going to call Who's OHotMU. And if the title doesn't give it away, what I've decided to do is reread the original runs of Who's Who and the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. The first one to begin was the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. And the first issue was basically, I think, supposed to cover A. I only have the first issue in front of me, so I'm not sure if there's any spillover of the A's into the second issue. The OHotMU, official handbook of the Marvel Universe, was originally supposed to be just 12 issues. In fact, that's what it says on the cover, number 1 in a series of 12. But actually there was 15 issues, although I think the active characters only appeared in the first 12, and then books 13 and 14, I think, were the Book of the Dead, and these were all, of course, characters who were dead, and then book 15 was like paraphernalia, weapons, and stuff like that. I've got them around here somewhere, and I'm going to dig them out. Anyway, my plan is to try and read at least 5 entries per week. So each day, I try to read at least 5 days a week, I try to read at least 1 entry from each. I know that doesn't sound very ambitious, and it's probably going to take me forever to get through these, but that's my plan. Oh, and then the Who's Who, that ran for 26 issues. Now, this actually started before, and I was reading a little bit about this on Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge. And this actually started before Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it didn't finish until after Crisis on Infinite Earths was over. And so one of the interesting things about Who's Who is that some of the entries are pre-crisis entries, some of them are post-crisis entries, and yeah, I advise looking at that. It's not a whole lot that's written there, but it's interesting what it points out. So Who's Who opens up with a in fact, both of them open up. There's editorials in both of them. The Who's Who one is written by Marv Wolfman and Len Wein. And I read this a couple of weeks ago at this point. So I don't remember too much. I don't have any particular memories of what they had to say here. I'm kind of browsing over it. But basically they list all each page is a different character. Sometimes a page will be split and they'll have two characters on that page, and sometimes they might have a double page spread, and especially like for a team, they do that quite often. So I'm just going to go through, I've only read about 7 or 8 pages of each at this point. Like I said, I'm running a little behind. So I'm just going to talk about some of the things I saw. I think I'm going to start with the OHotMU. So the first few characters, the first few pages, let's see, the first page is Abomination. It's a Hulk villain. I don't really have a whole lot of experience with Abomination or with the Hulk. Was never really a big reader of the Hulk, although I have some issues around. Apparently he's from he's from Yugoslavia, which at the time was still a country, but of course no longer is now. And let's see, anything else? Former alias Agent R7. He has 5 fingers and 2 toes. And I think he's basically another one of these kind of Hulk clones in the sense that he's another person who became super strong when he was exposed to radiation and therefore had to fight the Hulk, I guess. But looking at his powers, he's capable of pressing approximately 100 tons. Okay, well, let's keep going. Absorbing Man. Okay, this guy was originally I think he still is considered to be a Thor villain. And there's some good stories with him if you go back to the Kirby and Lee era. And his real name was Carl Creel. His first appearance was Journey into Mystery number 114. Let's see, anything else of interest? He's 6'4", 265 pounds. And this is the guy who can change the composition of his body. So like he touches something that's made of steel, he turns to steel. And apparently at one point he even used it to it says here, he was both able to mimic the properties of Thor's hammer and the strength of Thor himself. Okay, El Aguila, which translates to the eagle in English. And he first appeared in Power Man and Iron Fist. And actually, I think he's supposed to be a mutant, is what it said in here. And he wields a sword. He kind of looks like a swashbuckler, kind of like something out of an Errol Flynn movie. He was in a story in an early issue of Marvel Fanfare. I don't think it was a Power Man and Iron Fist story. I think it was just him? I'm not sure. Anyway, I haven't read a whole lot. In fact, I think that's the only story with him that I've read. Next, we have AIM, Advanced Idea Mechanics. So this is the first group to appear. They only get a single page. And it kind of talks about AIM, about the major achievements of AIM, and a splinter group from AIM, which I was unaware of. The renegade section of AIM. And of course, MODOK is the head of AIM, or at least he was. Of course, this stuff is from the early to mid-'80s, so, it's not necessarily, canon anymore, but hey. Ajak is the next character, and he's from the Eternals. The Eternals was the first Jack Kirby book that I can remember reading. Although I've got most of them, but I'll be damned if I can tell you which issue of the Eternals it was that I read. But I remember seeing one when I was first starting to read comics, and this was before I really got into collecting comics or buying a lot of comics, but and let's see, he was born in the Soviet Union. And it's not a whole lot on it. 6'1", 220 pounds. He's able to press approximately 1,600 pounds. So that's almost a ton. Okay, well, let's move on. Okay, the next page is split in two. The top half is Alpha Flight. That's right, Alpha Flight just gets a half a page here. Kind of funny. Now, this is before Alpha Flight. I'm pretty sure this is before Alpha Flight appeared. Got their own book. Although not by much, I don't think. Let's see, this came out, this has a cover date of January of 83. I think it was during 83 that Alpha Flight got their own book, but prior to that, I think they'd appeared in X-Men, of course, and I'm not sure if they may have appeared somewhere else, like Marvel Team Up or Marvel 2-in-1, I'm not sure. And these are drawn by John Byrne, and you've got Vindicator, as he was called at that point, Sasquatch, Aurora, North Star, Shaman, Snowbirds, Marina, and Puck. Now the bottom half of the page is the Alpha Primitives. The Alpha Primitives worked for the... Wait, was it the Inhumans? Yeah, the Inhumans. And that's one that I was really unfamiliar with. I haven't read a whole lot of the Inhuman stuff, only some of their Silver Age stuff, just mostly the stuff that appeared in, well, some of the stuff that appeared in Fantastic Four. But I have no recollection. Now, the next page is definitely is American Eagle. Now, American Eagle first appeared in Marvel 2-in-1 Annual number 6. And I remember buying that off the stands back in 83, 82? Must have been before 83. So probably 82 or maybe even 81. Because I remember, because Marvel 2-in-1, of course, would be the Hulk, and American Eagle was the other hero. And I think Wyatt Wingfoot was also in that story, but I'm not certain. And the villain was Claw. And Claw was once again after... I mean, because Claw first, I think, appeared in Fantastic Four in the same story that featured the first appearance of Black Panther. And so let's see, American Eagle, 6 feet, 200 pounds. Carries a crossbow. He has super senses. His real name is Jason Strongbow. But that was my introduction, well, to American Eagle and to Claw. I might have read a little bit of Marvel 2-in-1 before that. I'm not sure. Okay, so the last page that I've actually read is Anaconda. And this is a character that I know by name and by appearance, but I really haven't read much of anything with her. I know she's part of the Serpent Society, and she later they played a role in, I think, the Gruenwald run, was it, on Captain America, which I really haven't read, although I have some of the issues. So that's about it for the OHotMU. Now for the Who's Who. Let's see. First page is Abel. Abel is the host of House of Secrets, which was one of DC's horror books from 70s. He might have even appeared in there. What's this? First appearance, House of Secrets number 61. I'm not sure when that was. If that was in the 60s or the 70s. I know House of Secrets ran at least until the early 80s, or probably mid-80s. Because if he was included in here, then that's probably... Okay, so the next page is Abnegazar, Wrath, and Ghast. And they were these demons, and I remember I had an issue of Justice League of America. Now, they first appeared in Justice League of America number 10, but I had one of the issues when the Justice League and the Justice Society teamed up, and they also teamed up with the Legion of Superheroes. And Modru and Abnegazar, Wrath, and Ghast were part of that story. Those were all villains from that story. And they were 3 demons who were held within these objects, a bell, a wheel, and a... What was the other one? A bell, a wheel. I'm looking at a picture of it, but I'm not sure what it is. The silver wheel of Wireleth, the green bell of Athul, and the red jar of Calithos. Something like that. And they are demons. I may have said that already. Okay, so the next page is Abracadabra. Abracadabra is a Flash villain. Now I'm talking about Barry Allen, of course, at this point. And one of the things that stood out when I read this was that he is 6'6" and he's 195 pounds. And he looks thin, but that seems almost Wraith-like thin to be only 195 pounds at 6'6". And this is, of course, drawn by Carmine Infantino, who drew a lot of the Silver and Bronze Age Flash. And Abracadabra dressed like a magician, but he was actually from the future. Was he from the 64th century? Yes, the 64th century. Flash fought a lot of people from the future. Or he fought some, at least. I think the original Reverse Flash, was also from the future. Okay, so next is Adam Strange. I haven't read any. Well, his first appearance, was in Showcase number 17, which is a Silver Age book. And I know a little bit about the character, but the only story I think that there's a couple that I've read. There was the one by, it was drawn by, oh God, now I'm completely blanking on it. I'll have to add this in the notes afterwards. I think it was written by Andy Diggle. And the artist's name, I cannot remember, but I liked his work, and I bought it based on that, and I wasn't too crazy about it. And what I did like, which came out earlier, was the three prestige issue Adam Strange story that was done, I believe, by Andy and Adam Kubert. I don't know if they wrote it, though. I'm not sure. But that's a good one. And it looks a lot like their father's work. They were obviously trying to make it look like their father's work, but that was a good story, and that was something I read when I was getting back into comic books about 10, 12 years ago, and it wasn't new at that point. It may have been a new printing of that or a new collection, but and it's like I said, that's definitely collected. So the next page is Aegis, Aegeus. I think that's Aegis. I think that's how it's pronounced. And that's a Greek name, and he is a Wonder Woman villain. First appeared in Wonder Woman number, see if I can read this number, is it 297? Unfortunately, my copies of some of these comic books, the ink has bled a little bit, and so some of these things, the small print, I cannot read everything, and sometimes the numbers are especially hard to read. But he had some powers. He had a flying horse, and he had some powers that he acquired from the gods or from some sorcerer. But of course, he used them for evil because he was a villain. Okay, so the next page is Airwave, and it's split in two. There's Airwave 1 and Airwave 2. And apparently Airwave 2 was, he had the same name as Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. And he's apparently, a cousin of Hal Jordan. And I think Airwave was supposed to be, back then, Airwave was supposed to be one of the only heroes, the original Airwave, Airwave 1, who was his father, I believe. Yes, his father was supposed to be one of the only heroes who was active on Earth 1 during World War II. I might be wrong on that, but that's what I thought. Although, they don't specifically say what Earth. Oh, no, wait, here it does say it. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, so he was a district attorney. It says sometime after World War II, Jordan traveled from Earth 2 to Earth 1 under an as-yet unexplained circumstance. Huh. Okay, so the first Airwave appeared in Detective Comics number 60, and the second one appeared in Green Lantern number 1, that can't be 160, 100. 100. As I said, I probably should try to find better copies of these that haven't deteriorated quite so much. The next character is Ali Katabra, and she's part of the Zoo Crew, and that's a blind spot for me. I really have not read any Zoo Crew. I vaguely remember when they first showed up, but I thought it was kind of silly. I wasn't really interested in it. It probably wasn't too long before, maybe a year or so before this Who's Who came out. Okay, so the final thing is All-Star Squadron. And All-Star Squadron was one of my favorite books when I was growing up. And it's a nice double-page spread of some of the members of the All-Star Squadron. Eventually, I'm not sure what issue they were up to at this point, but eventually the All-Star Squadron would grow to include basically all the costumed heroes during World War II, or just about. And in issue 31 of All-Star Squadron, and I'm not sure if that issue had come out at this point, based on the roster here, okay, so Amazing Man is here, so they have to at least have written, and Tarantula's in his new uniform. It's possible this is before issue 31, but it couldn't have been. But Amazing Man first appeared in issue 23, and Tarantula got his new costume, I believe, in issue 24. Let me see. I'm looking at the other characters, see if there's any other clues I can gather, and I don't have any ideas. So this may have been after issue 31, possibly. I don't think it's too much later than that, though. So that's it for this time on Who's OHotMU. I'm trying to read at least 5 pages of each per week, which means it'll probably take me 30 years to read my way through the whole thing, but that's the plan, in addition to other stuff I'm reading. So next time, hopefully in another week, I will record another 5 pages from each in this Who's OHotMU feature. That's it for episode 33 of Dave Talks Comics. Questions or comments can be posted on the episode page at davetalkscomics.com or tweet them to at Dave Talks Comics. Email your comments or questions to dave@davetalkscomics, or you can leave whatever thoughts you have or questions you might have in whatever forum you find this episode posted. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about The Question. This is the 1987 series, issues 4 through 7, and I will be talking about Star Wars, Clone Wars, the next few episodes that I watched, the cartoon. Thank you for listening.